You know, we finished with the talk last time, and that was a talk on what? That was a talk on experiential learning.
Experiential learning.
And today we are doing something on blended learning.
Blended learning.
You'll be surprised to know when I chose the participants, we had the largest number of participants for this talk. But later on, suddenly, I don't know why, it changed. I'm not able to show.
Mute yourself. Please mute yourself.
Everyone requested to mute yourself, please, everyone.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are on recording now, so naturally, please be very cautious. Aroraji, you will have to help me.
Sir.
Are we able to see this clearly?
Yes, we are able to see this.
In the,
see your sound level to be little higher.
You can go in the participants list, sir, and see who has not muted himself. You might put him on the mute.
True, sir. True, sir.
Put him on the mute. Right, my dear friends, with your permission, I begin. I'm talking. The first slide is blended learning. And what is in front of you, I think you all recognize it. It's a part of, essential part of our kitchen now. You may call it a blender, you may call it a mixing. That's right.
Mixing the fruits and vegetables.
I'm sure my son who replied me, I would appreciate if he goes to the chat box. See, I, for example, like pineapple juice. But I'm sure Aroraji does not like pineapple. He loves orange juice. And you may like pomegranate and apple. So there is a choice in this blender. I love my juice early in the morning as a part of my breakfast. Aroraji doesn't do that. He loves to have his glass of juice after he comes at 4. And there is another third gentleman, Dr. Avtar. Is hell with juice. Give me a cup of coffee. He doesn't like juice. Now, what I am trying to tell you, this blender, when we use it in the kitchen, we can use it as per our own choice. We have the choice of time. We have the choice of place. We have the choice of the fruits that we can use. Blending can be done anytime, but then the choice of blending what is to be blended, when is it to be blended, and where is it to be blended is our choice. That might give you an idea of what blending is. Just give you an idea, which is a very difficult concept in this. I come to what will be the objectives of this today's talk. At the end of this talk, we should be able to understand the meaning of blended learning. At the end of this talk, we should be able to understand how is teaching learning impacted or affected by blended learning. We should be able to learn some ways of creating blended learning by e-learning materials or by using models. We should also be able to understand how to devise certain strategies.
You got mute, sir. You got mute. You got mute.
Sir, please unmute yourself, sir.
I did that, sir. Can
It's
you hear
not
me
audible,
now?
sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You can hear me. Maybe by chance. My
Go
cursor
with the previous slide, sir.
I'll go with the previous slide. My cursor might have gone that side, and that's why. Just a minute, sir. I think I did speak about this till now.
Sir.
Till here I was
ahead,
audible. I said that at the end of our today's talk, which is 1.5 hour talk, the objectives that we have before us is number one, we should understand what blended learning means. What's its meaning? The concept as well as its application. We should be able to understand how blended learning impacts or affects the teaching learning process. If we are not able to do this, well, then we have not understood the talk. We should be also able to create some e-learning content for our children. What are some of the easy ways of doing that? We should have learned. And at the same time, the most important thing is, how can we devise strategies so that we are able to affect the time that is consumed by us in the classroom strategies? The next slide in front of you is who, where, when. For example, who gave us blended learning? Where should we use blended learning? When should we use blended learning? How to use blended learning? Why to use blended learning? And what is blended learning? I will be able to answer most of these questions. I'll try to see that they become simple. But who is a little difficult for me, because for who, I will have to take you to 1840. I think you can understand that's almost, how many years is that, Aroraji? 160 years, is that right? No, that was 180 years.
160 years.
160 would mean 2000. I said 1840, we had a gentleman known as Isaac Pittman.
180.
And he is mostly known as for his shorthand development, Pittman's shorthand. Any of you interested in learning shorthand and typing would learn Pittman's shorthand. And this gentleman invented basically shorthand, where through newspaper cuttings or through postcards, he would send you a shorthand text and you had to translate it into English and send it back. So there was feedback, there was assessment, all was postal. We regard him as the inventor of distance learning or distance education. But about 100 years later, we had the first frames, mini frames or big frames. And another 20 years later, in 1998, we had first time when learning management systems were used in technology. So I can't assign a name to it. To be very honest with you, when I researched on blended learning as to where from has this name come, I found that it has come from an association of English teachers across the world who gave such teaching the name blend. And the name began as blended learning. But as regards why, how, I am moving steadily. I want you to think of your 40 minutes of the class time that you use. You know, most of our time is lost in managing the class. I am not using the word disciplining the class. Managing, sizing up our children, moving around in the class, attending to each individual child. Even though we try our best, we cannot reach every child. A lot of time is required by us in explaining certain concepts, in giving examples, in illustrating, in helping children individually. Individual instruction becomes as much a misnomer in a class as much as possible, because we all hurry up covering the content and finishing the syllabi. Is there a chance that we can save on this classroom time? If we could do more during these 30 minutes by using certain other techniques, certain other methods, by using some measures of technology, is there a chance that we can reverse the clock a little and do something? There is. That is what blended learning is. That's why it saves upon class time. That's why it gives liberty to the children. But before I talk of blended learning, you must understand that blended learning is a delivery methodology, a mechanism or a pedagogy of teaching. You have a specific objective in mind, and now you are combining your face-to-face teaching, which we call as classroom-based teaching, with online instruction. You are using electronic media, you are using the television, you are using assignments which are paper-based, and you are using all kinds of informal and formal solutions to mix up everything so that your time is not wasted. And usually when concepts are difficult, this kind of a methodology works wonders. The children get more time to work at their own pace. They choose their own time. They redo the entire exercise. For example, they have heard my lecture. Now it's already taped with them or recorded with them. They have not understood the whole of it. They can replay it once again, listen to it once again, listen to it in parts, break to it in parts, make notes on their own. So the pace is their own. It's controlled by them at their own pace, and they learn. Now, what have I blended? I have blended my face-to-face teaching of my children with online teaching. You can, when I use online teaching, I'm not using only technology of one particular source. I'm not using only the DG boards. I am using the internet facilities. I am using the mobile. I am using all the social media applications that are available with me. That was a definition that I chose, but there's a formal definition also. That blended learning is personalized learning. Learning which is reaching out to every individual depending upon his own needs. Every child cannot read at the same pace. He cannot understand things at the pace. You see, unfortunately, I as a teacher and we all as teachers Try to teach the most brilliant students in the class. We are focused on them because they should not suffer, they should not lag behind. We try to give them accelerated classes also. We try to give them additional materials also. And then we try to attend to our weak children. We try to support them. Support them how? Support them by having additional practice exercises, additional review notes for them so that they also come up. Now we are attending the top, we are attending the bottom. The middle is lost. And there are teachers, good teachers, and there are many of you who attend to this mythical middle. The middle doesn't exist. There's a myth that there are some bright ones and there are some low ones and there is an average. There is no average. It is just a myth. But because we want to reach to all the children, we have to personalize our teaching. An approach where you try to personalize the learning. And what does it do? It combines both face-to-face, where you can personalize it in the face-to-face mode. If the number of children is a smaller group, I can find out the difficulty of each one of them. I can diagnose the areas of weakness of each one of them. If I am working with a smaller group, that is the advantage of a tutorial system. If I have a group which is, say, 10 students, and I give them a project, I can find out the qualities of each child. Who is the best team leader among them? Who is good at statistical data? Who is good at seeking information and researching on data? So you can understand, whenever we are working with online teaching or face-to-face teaching, the child has the liberty of choosing his own content. He has the liberty of choosing the pace at which he wants to study, and he has the liberty of choosing whether he should study the easy chapters first or the difficult chapters first. So whenever a teacher combines face-to-face teaching and online teaching, all mechanism and all methods of online teaching, be it mobile, be it WhatsApp, be it the social media, be it the internet, be it the what we call as the DTH, direct to home delivery through TV programs. Whenever a teacher combines both of them with face-to-face teaching, there are different models, we'll be talking about that, and he differentiates, the child is now free to move and choose the content that he wants, to move at his own pace, and to decide upon the difficulty level of the instruction. We think of that as blended learning. You can see two large egg-shaped, oval-shaped diagrams here. On the left, we have the brick and mortar of our teaching, which we call as the classroom teaching. In the classroom, it's a conversation going on, because I believe all classrooms are interactive. I don't believe a classroom is the teacher only talking like I am talking. There's always an interaction which is negotiated between the children and the teacher on a particular concept. There is production of certain material. There's a lot of collaboration going on. And then the teacher ensures that the children do not only have knowledge of the concepts, they do not only give meaning to that knowledge and reach the second level of Bloom's taxonomy by understanding the concepts, but they apply those concepts in familiar and unfamiliar situations. In online learning, this does not happen. In online learning, the child is free. He can pace himself. He can finish his entire lesson in less than 20 minutes, or he can break it up into 20 minutes modules of 3 parts because it's a difficult chapter. He can do it sometimes in the morning, repeat it in the afternoon, do it next day once again. His language skills improve at once. He gets content which is authentic, because now he doesn't depend on Professor Handoo. Professor Handoo may be committing mistakes of language. He may not be so certain about the content that he is using. His content may be borrowed from certain other sources, and it may not be the true content. It may not stand the test of time. But when you give online content, it's always authentic content. And through online, there's a lot of practice which is possible. Exactly, that's possible in the face-to-face teaching also. And the teacher gets a lot of feedback. And then the monitoring of the child and his progress can be monitored constantly. Now, when you combine both these, you can see a Venn diagram created, which is a less lighter gray-blue shade. We call it the blended learning. When you combine the two, you take the plus points, the conversation and the self-pace. You take up the negotiated introduction and the language skills. You take the application part of one and the monitoring of the progress part of another. When you combine both them, we call this as blended learning. Let's understand this with the help of a video. I'm sorry. this has been happening and I have been trying many things. Watch it very carefully, you will understand many things.
Fundamentals of Blended Learning. My name is Michael Thompson, and I'm the Director of School Partnerships at Education Elements. We work with schools across the country to help them think about blended learning and to design instructional models which use technology effectively. Our primary product is the HLMS, which I will discuss in more detail in some of our other videos. In this video, I want to share the fundamentals of blended learning. I'll explain what is meant when someone uses the term blended learning, describe some of the blended learning models, and discuss the results we are getting. What is blended learning? If you think about the traditional classroom environment on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum is a student learning on a computer at home, blended learning is somewhere in the middle. Now, let's ask ourselves, how do we differentiate and individualize instruction in the classroom? Frankly, students are not engaged in lecture-style instruction. We know that small group instruction, personal learning plans, guided practice, and inquiry-based teaching all lead toward a better and deeper understanding of concepts. Unfortunately, differentiation and feedback doesn't scale without technology. So blended learning is about leveraging digital content to provide students with skills and practice. Meanwhile, the teacher focuses on depth and application of concepts to teach higher order thinking skills. So what if we can create an environment where 1, students can get individualized self-paced instruction, 2, teachers can provide differentiated small group instruction based upon weekly or daily data, and 3, schools can operate at a much lower cost per pupil, which will allow them to reallocate resources. This environment is blended learning. What are some of the blended learning models? Let's go back to the spectrum of learning environments. As we see it now, there are 4 models emerging: lab rotation, class rotation, flex, and pod. I'm going to go over each of these now. Lab rotation is where students move in and out of a classroom to a computer lab. Many people seeing this model will think it looks very familiar to a traditional computer lab. However, if you look under the hood, the difference is that in a lab rotation, the data from the content in the learning lab informs the instruction in the classroom. In a class rotation model, students are broken out into smaller groups. So a class of 30 may be broken out into 4 small groups. Every 20 minutes, the groups may rotate between stations. 1 station is with the teacher. 2 stations are with the computer, and the 4th station may be guided practice. In this environment, a teacher has the ability to monitor the whole class, manage behavior, and maintain the class culture. In the flex model, the learning lab might look like a large call center with banks of computers. Around the edges of the lab might be smaller breakout rooms for classes. In this model, the students work mostly on the computers, and a teacher might pull out a group of students for seminar, intervention, or direct instruction. One of the newer models is the pod concept. Essentially, it's a school within a school, and each pod might have multiple grade levels. In this model, the role of the teacher may be redefined and broken out into discrete roles: an advisor, a behavior specialist, or an instructor to support each pod. All of these models are rethinking the traditional school, giving students more control over their learning and providing students with targeted instruction. What are some of the results? From a student perspective, students are more engaged using online content versus paper and pencil practice worksheets. They like getting real-time feedback and knowing where they stand at any time. Students can control how fast or slow they need to go through a lesson. In these schools, we see students accelerating past the skills for their grade level, and this is what we call unleashing their learning velocity. Also, Even though the class sizes may be larger, students feel that their classes are actually pretty small because the experience they have with the teacher is in a small group. Now, from a teacher perspective, the teachers we've spoken to find it easier to plan for small group instruction versus trying to teach to the middle and differentiating top and bottom. Teachers find teaching in small groups more rewarding because the students are more engaged. And finally, teachers are surprised by how much easier classroom management is with students fully engaged on the computers versus when students are doing things on pencil and paper. Thank you for watching our video on blended learning. We are excited by the potential opportunities blended learning brings, and I hope you found it useful as you think about your own school.
I move to 5 key concepts of blended learning. If you look at this circle, you will find the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And against these numbers, you will find the 5 key concepts. Self-paced e-learning. I'll explain it further through a slide. Number 2 is face-to-face learning. Number 3 is mobile learning. Number 4 is social learning, which is informal also. And number 5 is virtual classroom training. 2 and 5 we can easily understand, but understanding 1, 3, and 4. When you combine all these 5, you arrive at the concept of what we call as blended learning. Now let's look at self-paced learning. Self-paced e-learning, where the child is in total control of the pace at which he wants to learn, the place where he wants to learn, the concepts that he wants to learn, and the rate of his progress is determined. We have acronyms like SCORM, not used now at all. The concept is a very difficult one, Shareable Content Object Reference Model, or AICC. This is Aeronautical Association or Industry, and CC is computer-based training. These courses were developed by these people, and we found out that the courses were easy to follow, they were easy to access, they were easy to understand. They were predominantly used not for students, but for training people. And for training them, especially in soft skills, they were found very functional. They could reach up any culture in geodiverse cultures, and they were consistent. It saved a lot of cost. They increased our access to e-learning material anytime, provided we had access to technology. Self-paced, you have to understand the pace of learning is now controlled by the child, and he has e-learning programs, e-learning materials available to him. That's one way of combining it. The second, face-to-face teaching, you all have been doing it, we all have been doing it throughout our lives. It's a conventional method of teaching and training. Here, there's a lot of human interaction, and therefore the training becomes very practical. There are workshops, there are sessions, there are discussions, and then it's easier to run as a training platform. It's easier to leverage. The only thing that you have to do is to plan thoroughly beforehand and organize the logistics. You need a classroom, you need a podium, you need a speaker, and you need children to be seated properly. And it's easy to manage the challenges either in a large or a medium scale organization. There's a high cost involved in it. It's not low cost. The cost is very high because the trainers who come from different places, not the teachers who are appointed in the school, they travel, their logistics, their how much time they devote, one has to pay for that. The third is mobile learning. This is on the go, anywhere, anytime, any place. Handheld devices, accessible. Only you must have the data facility available to you. You get in-time information. While you are working, you can have your mobile in the left hand, looking for instructions, following stepwise instructions, and on the other hand, you can get training. It involves you in new processes and gives you enough of opportunity for new practices. It's a great tool, both for pre-training and post-training, and for collaborating. For example, we are 140 or we have 209. I'm not certain. I've looked at the program. We are 209 people here. I can create a group where all the 209 of you can collaborate with each other. You can share information with each other. I have 2 groups of school principals. In one, we have 256, which is the maximum strength permissible. Well, they're always sharing whatever information they have, whatever information regarding schools, subject knowledge, regarding CBSE circulars, regarding MHRD information, regarding states coming up with orders. They keep on sharing. That's collaboration and information sharing, and here the mobile is used. And arguably, this is going to be more a future of learning, because the mobiles are going to have better leverage, better accessibility. Now let's look at social learning. This also is very important. Although much of social learning sites you may not be visiting and the learning is absolutely informal, but we can use social media also for learning. There's a lot of collaboration. See how many people are using the LinkedIn, the Facebook, the Twitter. I mean, Twitter is very popular with people. And a lot of knowledge sharing happens through videos on Facebook, videos on Twitter, videos on What Is Up, and certain other programs. These are the programs which we have available in India. Other countries have their own programs available. The acceptance due to changing social networking behavior of people is becoming increasingly more now. See, initially, I remember there was a time when up to the age of 13, we never allowed anybody to enter or join Facebook. And parents were very hesitant in putting a mobile in the hands of their smaller kids. They would say, no, they will misuse it, and therefore the information cannot be given to them. They must not use it. But now we are finding that it's a tool which they need to use. And I see majority of my children learning these days. All the lessons that are given to them are given on social networking sites. It increases a lot of sharing of information across various countries and lot of collaboration. Let's come to the fifth. This is purely virtual classroom where the two do not meet. The teacher and the student, or the trainer and the trainee, do not meet. It is done across a distance. It's a cost-effective way of delivering training. There is a lot of interface, a lot of stimulating classroom experience. And face-to-face sessions, if held, can be augmented. You must have known that in distance mode of education, people do sometimes come together for contact programs. Immediately after these contact programs, some videos are sent to the centers, some audios are sent to the centers, and they are told to reach those centers and go through those videos and audios. So augmentation of a face-to-face session. I conduct a face-to-face class. Now I want to give some more material to my children. I can do that on the virtual platform. The presentations are also shared. Online discussions are also held. There are a lot of exercises which are experimental and interactive. It builds up a lot of connectivity between various groups, and the groups collaborate, and then recordings of these groups can be made available so that you can study at any future time, whichever is convenient to you. Now, I have 3 or 4 questions, maybe possibly 4. Where to use blended learning? Please use blended learning for all those concepts where you see children struggling. When you teach in a class, face-to-face class, and you find children have understood something very thoroughly, the concept is very easy, don't use blended learning. I'm waiting for that. Could you please go mute here? Aroraji, please see whose audio that is. That's right. Thank you very much. So whenever the concepts are easy and children understand them, you don't need to blend it with anything. But whenever the concepts are difficult and you find children are struggling, children are having a hard time, that's when the time is there to blend it. Those units where you have a lot of information. I had my teachers, especially in social sciences, who would say, sir, this chapter has 23 pages. This chapter has 54 pages. They were dealing with, for example, the Delhi Sultanate, the freedom struggle movement of India. These chapters are very lengthy and a lot of information. Therefore, they thought it would take them a lot of time. So those are the chapters where blending must be done. Those topics where it is important that the child will understand the concept through experiential learning. He needs a hands-on activity. The understanding of the concept will be better not through a lecture, but by his working himself on the concept. Do it, use blending. And when children generally make mistakes. There are certain areas, certain questions. You have to be a kind of a diagnostic, remedial person, one who diagnoses where the errors are, the mistakes are, and then remedy the error. If you see that your children are committing mistakes on certain questions while answering them, then is the time that those questions become questions for being blended, online instructions being given. If I sum it up, difficult concepts, units with lot of information, hands-on activities, and questions which children do not generally answer. Those are the areas where blending must be done with other sources. Why blend? Because it's we want effective learning to happen, and we want it to happen in less time. That's one. We don't have enough time with us. The time available with us is very limited, and we want learning to be effective. It should last longer. Then we do not want students to develop only one particular skill. Like I'm teaching languages, I don't want them to learn only listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Well, these are the basic, we call this LSRW, basic 4 skills. I want them to be creative writers. I want them to be creative readers. I want them to appreciate literature. I want them to understand how poetry was composed. I want to talk about eras that were spoken, and so that they love literature. Now, if I want to create these multiple skills in my leaders, blending is the only way. Plus, the children in my class, they are all marvels. I must tell you, they are all wonders of God. But each one of them is unique. Each one of them is distinct. Each one of his own style of learning. Each one of them learns in his own way. Some learn faster, some take time to learn, some do not learn at all, and some have learned everything before even I have opened my mouth. We need to differentiate our instruction depending upon the needs of the child. There are children with special needs, there are children with difficulties, there are children who are gifted. How can I customize my lesson or my lecture to all of them? That's where blending is required to be done. If I want to assess students, blending is one of the finest methods. The paper pencil test is giving way to other ways of testing now, with the board CBSE deciding that they will this year have 50% MCQs. I think the only way to develop that competence in our children is not by using MCQs written on papers, but MCQs used through online measures. If you want to make learning interesting and fun and enjoyable for children, then blending is the way. If you want to give up your role as a teacher-centered educator and hand over this role to the child so that your class becomes a student-centered class or a student-centric class, then you must go over to blending. I sum this up again. Save upon class time and make learning effective. Develop multiple skills among the children. Use differentiated instruction. Understand the understanding and assess the understanding of the students. Make learning more interesting, and then make learning student-centered rather than teacher-centered. Now, how to use blended learning? Firstly, you have to choose the content where you would go for blending. The blended learning approach would mean that some part of it would be done face-to-face, somewhere there would be guided instruction, some part of it would be remediation, but the remaining part of it would be either on mobile or on TV or on net, or in some other form you would give them certain lessons and videos. Now choose the content that needs to be blended. Then choose a pedagogy, a method, a mode, a model. The models that you heard of, for example, one of those models which we preferably use in computers and in science. A teacher teaches about a concept, then he takes them to the lab and demonstrate. The children verify that in the laboratory. The only difference in blended learning is that here children go to a lab, they perform an experiment, then they come back to the class, and whatever information they have gathered in the laboratory is discussed and rediscussed again in the class. The approach that we follow nowadays is we give them the theory of computer science, the concepts of a law, say reflection or refraction or Archimedes. We give this theory to them in the class, then tell them verify in the lab. No, it should be the lab where from we should begin, and then whatever is generated in the lab should be discussed both in groups and collectively. Now choose this method and create the e-learning material for it. Would your e-learning material be learning on mobile? Would it be on WhatsApp that you would send it? Would you be that you would deliver a Zoom lesson, or would you get them into Microsoft Teams where they would discuss among themselves, or would you take them through a Kahoot program where they would do a quiz, or would you take them through certain other programs which are used for assessment? Please build in safeguard to ensure that children watch the content. Content has to be gone through. Either you deliver it or they learn and go through the content through a video, through an audio, through a podcast, whatever the source. Now link the learning material with in-class activity. After the children have watched that video, you need to bring them to a face-to-face activity where they express what they watched, what they learned, because that's where they practice the content. And here you can find out who are the children who need further support. They may perhaps need to watch the video again, or they may need some face-to-face interaction with you where you help them to build up their concept. So you must have a strategy as to how will you build the concepts of the students by integrating their active learning in the class with their online learning. And last of all, you must have a strategy for assessing students' understanding. All these activities become useless if you do not follow a regular process of assessment. I am very glad that by now that our teachers have been teaching for the last 2 months, they are integrating assessment with every lesson. They are not waiting. I have seen, my grandson, for example, receiving his online classes, is told that tomorrow I'll be testing you in lesson number 2, which is the fractions. And on the third day, I'll be testing you in your lesson number 7 of science, which is so and so. So assessment and online learning is being integrated. So this is how blended learning is being used. If I summarize this also, first you choose the content where you want to blend. Number 2, you choose the method that you will use. Will it be a pod method? Will it be a classroom rotation method? Will it be a lab rotation method? Or will it be a laissez-faire method where children are at liberty to choose any one of the methods? What kind of safeguards are you using so that you are sure that the children have viewed the content? How are you linking your face-to-face activity with the online learning? And how are you assessing the children? There are some ways in which you can create some e-learning content, and by now I am sure most of you already know it. You are enabled by your own principals, your own training organizations, your own managements. You can make your own videos, which we call as paper slide videos. You can sometimes make your own lecture videos also. You can sometimes have your PPT videos, like the video that I'm running right now. Although it's a PPT where I'm speaking to you, but if I use this very presentation the second time, I don't need to be talking. I need to use this video and it can be enough for them. There are some of the websites like the EdTed, where you have lessons, the Teachers Tube, the YouTube, which is meant for teachers, the Teaching Channel is another site which is available. The Edutopia is another site where you have 100 video lessons of flipped classroom. Flipped classroom is one of the forms of, blended learning, one of the techniques of blended learning, where the children are provided with all kinds of materials, links, books, references, videos, and they are told to go home and study it individually on their own. Once they have studied, there's a date fixed when they come back to the class. They are required to discuss it in smaller groups. So they discuss it in smaller groups and then they go online and make a video presentation with students of another institution, another organization. So what used to be the role of the class earlier is now the role of the home. And what used to be the role of the home, completing homework, revising, that is done now in the classroom. That's why we call it flipped classroom. I move over to another video that might help us to understand things better. I will have to try this. Watch it very carefully, please.
Blended learning is a way of teaching that combines online resources with in-person instruction. to create a more personalized learning environment. With blended learning, instructors often make some or all of the content available to the students outside of class time. Taking this to the extreme, students could consume all of the traditional lecture material at home at their own pace, and during class time they could complete work assignments traditionally given as homework during class, as well as other activities like team-based or project-based learning. This describes the flipped classroom model, because it flips what students do at home and in the classroom. Typically, when a teacher creates a lecture, they have to make an educated guess about the knowledge level of their audience, since they have limited information about what each student knows or remembers. If a lecture is too difficult, then most of the students will be lost. If it's too easy, then most of the students will be bored. So teachers typically end up lecturing to the mythical middle of the class and hoping for the best. By putting their content online, students can move at their own pace. Those who are familiar with the material can go through it quickly, even watching it at an increased speed, while others who aren't as familiar with it can pause to take notes, re-watch it, or call up other resources to help them understand a concept being explained. An additional benefit for all students is that they can choose to engage with the material when they're most alert, which satisfies both the early bird and the night owl. And for those students that have disabilities, they can take the breaks that they need without having to worry about missing out or distracting others. Putting work assignments back in the classroom also has a number of benefits from a learning science perspective. A lot of students describe the frustration of feeling like they understand a concept in class, but then being confused when they go home and try to apply it to an assignment. This is also supported by research. We learn best through active work, not passive listening. Doing work assignments during class time means that teachers are available when students need them the most, when they're trying to apply their knowledge. Another place where students traditionally struggle is with out-of-class group work, because it can be hard to coordinate an in-person meetup as well as make sure those meetings are constructive. Moving group work into the classroom setting makes the logistics straightforward, and it also allows the instructor to keep an eye on group meetings and to help facilitate them if needed. An important aspect of all blended learning environments is that they're not intended to do away with face time in the classroom. Unlike online classes, where all of the material and interactions are online, blended classrooms count on face-to-face interactions between students and teachers. Instead of getting rid of these interactions, blended learning structures are intended to optimize them, moving the teacher from a passive sage on the stage, who delivers didactic lectures to a large audience, to a more active role as a guide on the side, who interacts one-on-one with students to help guide them in ways that might be impractical or impossible with a traditional teaching model. By doing this, blended learning classes move from a teacher-focused learning model to a student-focused learning model. In a traditional classroom, the approach is generally time-based, meaning the whole class moves at the same pace. All students get the same lesson on the same day, and are tested on that material at the same time. And then they all move on to the next topic regardless of their individual exam performance or if they have gaps in their knowledge. Blended classrooms are flexible enough to allow the use of a mastery-based model, which acknowledges that not all students are going to get the material at the same time. Some students might need more time to understand a topic, while at other times those same students will speed ahead. By giving students as much time as they need on a topic and letting them decide when they're ready to be tested, blended classes can help to ensure that students move forward only when they've shown that they can apply what they've learned with confidence. Blended learning, though, like any teaching approach, brings with it some important challenges. Because this approach depends on technical resources, they have to be affordable, reliable, and easy to use for both the students and the teachers. Oftentimes, there's also a learning curve that has to be navigated, especially for those that have never used technology in the classroom. Another challenge is making sure that the materials are being reliably and independently consumed by the students, and they're coming to class prepared. This can be incentivized by closely tying in-class work assignments to the content that's being delivered online, and can often be tracked with learning platforms. Finally, one of the biggest challenges to blended learning is that it really changes the role of the teacher to that of a coach, and puts students in the driver's seat of their own learning, teaching them how to think as well as what to learn. This shift is an important one and requires buy-in from both the teacher and the student to be successful. When it's done right, though, blended learning can lead to a much more enjoyable and effective learning experience for both parties. Alright, so as a quick recap, blended learning combines online resources with in-person instruction. And one type of blended learning is the flipped classroom, where students consume their lecture resources at home and spend class time doing in-class activities. This allows the teacher to change from a passive sage on the stage to a more active guide on the side, facilitating a student-focused learning model.
I move further now. As we come across learning of students, we do find that there are different learning problems, and different problems require different solutions. You can't have the same solution for every problem. Every learner that we have, I said he is unique, he is distinct, he is a marvel, he is a wonder of God. And yet he is unique because his unique learning style and his requirement is different. Every child wants to learn in his own way. He can be an auditory learner, he can be a tactile learner, he can be a kinesthetic learner. Or in terms of his intelligence levels, what Howard Gardner spoke about, multiple intelligence. He may be spatial learner, learning through the use of space and his body muscles. He may be a musical intelligence wala, or he may be a logistic learner, or he may be a learner who is more interested in numbers. Therefore, it's not only that every problem has certain characteristics, but every problem needs a different kind of a solution. Number one. Number two, because we are coming into a digital age, we have started getting into this there. In the 21st century, more and more e-elements will get into our instructional content. For the last 20 years, we have been using e-learning in a very small way by firstly using more of computerized videos, computerized lessons, more of digital programs, more of software-based programs inside our classes, and they used to supplement our teaching. But they were all teacher controlled. It was not that the child was free to use them as and when he wanted. And even the teacher at times did not have the choice because the materials came from a particular organization and they were customized to suit the needs of millions of students. That doesn't always happen. There has to be a paradigm shift in our learning. We used to believe that learning was a relatively change in behavior, a permanent relatively change in behavior. And what were the various medias and the various formats of delivery that could cause learning. But now we have decided that blended learning can be more effective if we use these medias, if we use those medias. Now, some medias have been found to be more effective than others. I have seen that classes that are working purely using mobile and WhatsApp are doing as good as classes that are doing Zoom. I am not able to tell you as yet that those who got Zoom lessons are doing better than those, because children who were totally dependent on material that was sent to them, they had to go through that material at their own level, where here in the Zoom class, they could interact with the teacher and they could see the teacher. Now, we will have to make a research-based study as to what kind of paradigm shift we have to make, which media delivery mechanism is more suited to learning. And then blended learning is facilitated by combining effectively. I said to you in the beginning when I showed you that first juicer or mixer, I said Aurora ji does not like pineapple juice.
You're on mute.
You are on mute.
Sir, unmute yourself, sir. Sir, please unmute yourself. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Sir, some sound problem.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
No, now you can hear.
Yes, sir.
Now you can hear me. I was saying those methods of delivery that we have, which are different. For example, we have the online delivery method, we have the face-to-face delivery method, we have the social learning method, we have the mobile learning method. How much of them to be combined and how often, depending upon the mode of teaching styles and learning mechanisms, how to make learning effective, how to make the learning environment more interactive. This is what is blending. How much is to be blended, where it's to be blended, which platforms are to be blended, it may be determined by the availability also. I know we have certain available sites also, which have been given to us by the NCRT, the Pratham, the Swayambhan, and the Diksha. These channels are very useful. I am told that the CBSE is planning to get in touch with the NCRT, and we will have a site on TV dedicated for each class. That means we'll have 12 channels, 12 channels direct to home. One channel will be reserved for class 1, and similarly another channel will be reserved for class 12th or class 10. So there will be 10 direct channels, like you have Sony TV 5 channels, Z TV 4 channels. You will have 10 channels given by, or 12 channels given by NCRT. Now which one out of them to choose, and how many lessons will be done there and how many will be done by face-to-face teaching, that's what you will have to decide. Blended learning, what does it comprise? Everything, I must tell you. Classroom teaching, web-based teaching, webinars, CDs and ROM courses, videos, EPS systems, simulations, mobile learning, social learning, and much more. You can keep on adding everything. When you add all of them and use them very judiciously, very wisely, very effectively for ensuring learning of the children, you are doing blended learning. And now you may ask me, sir, how much of the content to be given online and how much to be taught face to face? My God, that's the question that nobody can answer. There is no fixed formula of how much to be blended, which technology to be used for blending what. The only guidance is that depending upon the course content that you have, depending upon the type of the learners that you have, depending upon the objectives that you have framed for the course completion, once you are sure about the objectives, once you have an understanding of the learner's profile, once you have understood what the content is, you can decide upon how to blend it, where to blend it, how much to blend, which source of technology should I use for blending it or not. It is the right blend that will ultimately matter. The learner's requirement, his level of understanding, the competencies that you want to grow in him, the nature and the location that the audience has, the resources that he has available. You see, I would blend everything on the 4G. I can't do it in Srinagar because 4G has not been available either at Jammu or Srinagar for the past 6 months now. So I will have to use those resources where I do not need 4G data. I would like to blend everything on TV, but I do not have TV channels that can be accessible to students without any charges, free of cost as yet. So the right blend will depend upon the requirement of the learner, his level of understanding, the competencies that I want to build in him, where he is residing, what kind of facilities and resources does he have. What are the advantages of this blended teaching? How will it benefit me? From passive learning, which happens always in a classroom, I am shifting now to active learning. The presentation format that we used to have in the classes was that the teacher was a sage on the stage and he was lecturing constantly and the children were passive learners. We want learning to be active. By active learning, I mean the learner has to be involved, he has to read, he has to interact, he has to listen, and he has to think. Once the learner starts thinking and starts speaking, automatically he is becoming an active learner. The second, blended learning offers the learners an opportunity sometimes to be together as a team, as a group, to collaborate, and sometimes to be on their own as individuals working. So it brings them together online and sometimes together on face-to-face teaching also. And there are competencies that can be developed by the children only in a group. You learn about teamwork in a group. You learn about perseverance only in a group. But you learn empathy only when you are all alone. You learn resilience when you take up decisions on your own. You learn that you have to be an entrepreneur and you have to struggle in life on your own. There the group may support you, may reinforce you, may encourage you, but will not help you to learn this. And then the best thing is, blended learning adds a humaneness to entire teaching. The content that you provide to your children, it's a content of high interest. It makes them accountable and answerable. And the assessment that they do is real. There is no element of your subjectivity or my subjectivity getting either into the content or into his being accountable or into our assessment. I don't say he's a good child because he answered my question. Now, his interaction levels with the e-learning content and the assessment that's done on the e-learning platform will reveal everything about his skills and about his attitudes. So, ultimately, if we look at all definitions of education that have come from the greatest, not only educators, but the greatest prophets, is that education should humanize human beings. We are human beings, but unfortunately, there is nothing that can be called as humane about us. We have forgotten that. We are today known by the language that we speak, the sect to which we belong, the state to which we have credentials to, the region, the country, nationalities are determining, religion is determining our boundaries. But here, the e-learning content is freed from that, the assessment becomes more humane. At the same time, you can customize your e-learning content for each child. If a child understands something which is very difficult very easily, then the content levels can be raised for him. The content can be made more complex and more difficult for him. You can change the e-content levels for different audiences and different segments. Depending upon the needs, you can tailor it. Tailoring it means customizing it, personalize it, individualize it, and make it relevant to him alone, so that it suits him. What are the applications that we have of this blended learning? Firstly, in the corporate sector, that's in training sector, in classrooms also, the costs are reduced, the resources are optimized, and the most important thing is, even though there is a saving of cost, there is a saving of resource, the scale at which it can reach out. I was surprised when some schools in Delhi started delivering online classes. They had children who had come to join their hostels from Jharkhand, from Chhattisgarh, from Bihar, from Nepal. And through online classes, we could reach those children also. So you can understand the scale now. An online class given by the Open University of London or the Open University of the Television and Radio University of China, the Open University of Pakistan, the IGNOU, Indira Gandhi National Open University of India. Now this university has students enrolled from all across the world. All these universities have students who study, irrespective of their age, irrespective of the profession in which they are engaged, they may be working and earning at the same time. So the scale of your reach increases. You can cut across geo boundaries and reach to your children. And the speed of learning is much faster. There are children who complete, say there are a course of 24 credits is completed by a student because he has more time available with him in 6 months. While as his very grandmother, who has also undertaken this course because she has several responsibilities, she takes 4 years to complete this course. And the throughput, the material that passes from the input to the output is also, of a quality, standard. What is the future, therefore, of this blended learning? The emerging models of blended learning are being impacted by the advances that are made in technology. I had a daughter of mine before you all joined me. She was talking to me because her mother knew me once, and that's where she had been a teacher in a school, and now this little daughter was here. And while Aurora ji was explaining me something that Geo has come up with the goggles where you can now interact using those goggles and see. She at once, because she must be good at computer, she said, sir, we call this as virtual reality. Now, these advances of virtual reality, artificial intelligence, robotics, as these things get more and more advanced, because dozens of these technologies are growing, they are emerging, they will have an impact on our academic learning. You'll be surprised to know if I tell you, many of you may have read about it. We have a school known as Hindustan International School. It's a school in Bangalore. And in this school, we have 6 robots this time teaching. I mean, they were teaching for the past 1 year. You'll say, sir, robots teaching? Yes. The teacher teaches the class, the robot is listening to the whole lecture, and the robot has been fed up with all the content, with all the questions, and with all the answers. And as the teacher leaves, the children question the robot, and the robot gives them all the answers on all the questions. So these robots were being used for science and for mathematics. 6 robots on an initial experimental basis from classes 6 to 10. And these 6 robots were changing. Now, it's not only blending where technology is being fully used, and academic learning of these students was seen to be impacted. We gave them a pre-test before the robots were used. We found where their performance was. After the robots were used, after they were given lessons in IT, after they were trained through online mechanisms also, and their environment also changed, we found that blended learning will provide more opportunities, more options, and as it provides more opportunities and more options, the quality of learning will also increase. More and more blending will happen. The models of blending, so far I told you that there were 5. The social learning, the face-to-face learning, the mobile learning, and then I said e-learning in all. But there will be more models that will be coming up very soon. You may have electronic books where the child interacts with them only, and he may get all the answers to his questions. I am waiting for the day when Gilbert's mathematics would be converted into a programmed learning model on technology. We have programmed learning books. Nowadays, you can understand you are going through a chapter in a book, and immediately after having gone for 2 pages, you are asked a question. And once you answer that question, you are told to look for the correct answer on page 57. You turn the page 57, your answer is correct. You are told to go ahead and read. If your answer is wrong, you are asked to go to page 34 and read another lesson. So there is a branching, and remedying is constantly going on. This programmed learning technique, once it's used in technology, I am told that there are some software-based companies in India who have been working, and to some extent, for example, the Byju's is being told to me, I have not experimented with. Even I am told the Exceed program that's being run by some schools is also run on programmed learning techniques. The children are given a test after the concept. If they are not able to answer the questions satisfactorily, they are run through another course which enables them to make up the deficiencies. So there will be more blends being added, more blends being co-opted. And the advent of technology will also mean that those pedagogical methods that we are using in the classes, or that were in prevalence at that point of time. See, when I was a student, the only method was the lecture method. When I became a teacher, there was a little questioning also that was used. And some of my teachers would use the Socratic dialogue or the eclectical method. As I grew up and I became a lecturer, I was taught at Indore in India, the inquiry-based model of teaching. Another 2 years down the line, I was told about project-based method of teaching. Another 10 years down the line, I had known about the direct method of teaching in English. I was now taught about the Dr. Palmer West's method of teaching. I was taught about the situational method of teaching. I was then taught about the structural method of teaching. And ultimately, I came to the communicative method of teaching, which we call as the Vygotskian model. These are pedagogical methods. When you teach science, you go by the inductive or the deductive, or you go by the heuristic method, which we call as the discovery approach also. Now, most of these pedagogical methods will either lose their sanctity or they will be discarded. Why? Because The method will not be used in full. The teacher will be a helper and a coach. It's only when the child has interacted with the online content, he has done his online lesson completely, he has done his online assessment, he will come to the teacher and tell him, sir, these are the portions where I am failing to understand, where I am not able to do well. Please help me in these areas alone. We move further. The way we learn, and it was perceived that could be materials could be delivered to us, this has changed. There was a time when my father thought, if my son gets, should I wait for you to switch it off? Could you mute yourself, please? I am waiting for you, madam. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Now, it was believed that when a teacher teaches, the child has to learn, but that doesn't always happen. Unless you make teaching relevant to the child, unless you arouse the interest in him, unless your teaching is perceived as an activity and the child interacts with the material. But now in blended learning, the way children learn has become totally different. There are children who learn much more by the use of technology than they learn through face-to-face interaction. And the deficiencies that are still left in e-learning can be removed by face-to-face interaction. Even the mode of delivery, which used to be teacher responsible or teacher controlled delivery, is now student control. He says, this part of the lesson will be explained to me by the teacher. This part I learn on the mobile, and the remaining part of it, I want videos and audios for that. As I move further, you will understand that whenever change occurs, there is a transformation. You have to give up your previous preconceived methods, ideologies, and notions. Whatever mechanism you were following of delivery previously, that changes. And as it changes totally, it doesn't change with a single teacher like me and like you. It changes with a group of teachers. And the whole institutional transformation begins. While as blended learning brings in a transformational change in the learning of materials by children at their own homes and children in the classes, when the teachers adopt blended learning as a policy decision by the school, then the transformation brought about is institutional. And trust me, we have not touched even the shores. It's only a beginning. You will see the change that will be brought about and how drastic will be. These are some of the drivers of this blended learning. We have seen that personalized learning is improved. We have seen that individuals progress greatly. We have seen that student engagement is more and therefore he is self-motivated. We have seen that there is a lot of shift in online learning and testing and sharing. We have seen that there is a need to extend time and stretch resources. We have seen that the effective teachers can reach out to a larger number of students now. We have also seen that some teachers and even the working conditions of teachers has increased. We have seen that the costs of the devices has decreased considerably. Go and buy a mobile in the market today. You will see it will be less, at least 20% less costly than it was 6 months earlier. Even the laptops have reduced their costs. The students and even their parents are starting to adopt e-learning mechanisms now and those applications. The interest of the entire society in the digital devices, which used to be very wide, this interest is narrowing. Let me tell you, my dear friends, blended learning is already in place. The need is that we use easy to use systems and manage blended learning at one place only. That's from our classroom. The child will be managing it from his home, but we will give him the facility of managing it from our classroom. The system has to make it easy for all and even the administrators, so that the new strategies that we employ, the new blending mechanisms and the platforms that we use are such to make it very convenient and easy, both for the schools as well as for the students. And here, I want to add something. I did not deliberately do it in the very beginning. blended learning is not only a combination of learning, combining face-to-face learning with electronic e-learning, social learning, mobile learning. No, it's not only that. It's basically managing learning. How do you manage the learning of your students? Is there a system which can be called as a learning management system, LMS? Blended learning is a learning management system because it teaches us how students learn. It assesses students on a regular basis. It ensures that learning does happen, and it integrates all the components in such a nice manner that we can call it a learning management system. And I come to a video wherein I would like to give you some practical instances of what I have seen blended learning happening really. Please watch this, because the examples that have been given here are from various subjects and various classes.
Hello, I am Mira Gottlieb. I am a technology integrator and coach and digital arts teacher at the Anglo-American School of Sofia. I have a master's degree in educational technology from Teachers College, Columbia University. So I'm here to talk to you about blended learning. What is blended learning? Blended learning describes a way where e-learning or online digital media is combined with traditional classroom methods so that a portion of the traditional face-to-face instruction is replaced with this web-based online learning. In the classroom, this method still requires the physical presence of both the teacher and student, but the student retains some element of student control over time, place, path, or pace. And this definition is via Insight Institute. So there are tons of resources available that support an educator to utilize blended learning, such as the Whitelock and Jeff's 2003 article in the Journal of Education Media Special on blended learning, and the Allervie and Galoup's 2003 article Using Information Technology and Learning, Case Studies in Business and Management Education Programs in the Academy of Management Learning and Education, which state that the integration of face-to-face and online learning to help enhance the classroom experience and extend learning through the innovative use of information and communications technology. Blended strategies enhance student engagement and learning through online activities to the course curriculum and improve effectiveness and efficiencies by reducing lecture time. All this research and articles are well and good, but as with any educational pedagogy, it is most helpful to see it in action to really visualize what the great potential of blended learning to promote active learning, self-paced, and student-centered classroom time. So in this video, we'll be looking at various case studies at the Anglo-American School where blended learning is being used with different student populations in different content areas and in different implementation styles. Here we're going to be looking at a high school English class where the teacher is using a platform of pre-created material from TED Ed.
Hello, my name is Josefina Rivera, and I am a high school English teacher at AAS. Blended learning for me is a hybrid between the sage on the stage and the guide on the side. It's an opportunity for me to give direct, individualized instruction, the first part to the whole class, but then in the second part to each individual student based on exactly where they are. For example, in my class, I'll use what's called the TED Ed platform, where I can show a video or give direct instruction to the class at the very beginning. And then each kid can use that platform to go online and work on examples or practice or activities at their own pace. And I can work with them individually and walk around the room and support them throughout that practice. Some common misconceptions that people have about blended learning is that if you sort of just walk into a room and look at a blended learning class, it seems as if the teacher is completely hands-off because the kid is so individualized in terms of his or her own work. But really, the teacher is allowing that student to work at his or her own pace and then just checking in at parts when kids have questions or don't understand something.
Now let's look at a middle school math class where the teacher is using a combination of teacher-created videos and a curated list of YouTube videos.
So one of the primary ways that I use blended learning is to present material where students have various levels of experience with it. So this past unit, we did solving equations. And what I did was use what's called a learning record, where students can work at their own pace through the different topics. So two-step equations, two-step equations with division, and so on. Very algorithmic here. The way that it would work is there's a virtual format with this where students click at the teacher example, which is demonstrated here in this box. They would copy down the teacher example, watch it on video, and then they would do some mandatory problem. If they were good, they could move on, and the way they would move on is they would write down a model problem here. As a polished model problem, they would teach it to somebody else who would then sign off that they agree. And then after that, they would have me come and interview them on that question where I could quiz them on their process, and then I would stamp them off. And then they would move on to the next level. And they would go through and they could work at their own pace. The nice thing about this is they're getting feedback from each other, and they also get feedback from me, and so there's multiple levels of assessment as they go. Another thing is that when students finish a topic, they can check off there'd be a board sheet where they would check it off. So students, if they get stuck, teacher example wasn't enough, they could see who's already passed that, they'd hunt down a person in class that they could ask for more help. I had a rule where before you ask me, you have to ask two other students who came in and asked me for clarifying questions, which then allowed students to reinforce what they know by teaching somebody else. The online version of this, there would be an example of a two-step equation, and so they could click on that, and that's what I've curated and gone through. There's a lot of resources online, the beauty of YouTube. You can go through, find examples of what you'd like. And that's where I would curate those online material of YouTube videos on how to solve a problem. And the students I had a couple of students who really struggled, but they loved it because they could go back, watch it over and over again. And usually it's not just, they had to write down one teacher example, but the video had 2 or 3 there that they could work through.
Now let's look at a high school visual arts class where the teacher is using teacher-created materials in a project-based setting. So I teach a high school design class, and blended learning is an integral part of how my class is set up. The class is completely project-based, and how it works is like this. At the beginning of any unit, we start with the concept, and we have a presentation and discussion about whatever that concept is. Then we have a project that ties both that concept and the skills that we need to be learning together. So instead of having to go to the front and really going through each of the skills that I want them to do, it's built into that project, and then it's built into that screencast the students that are watching. This is amazing because it allows the students to go through and learn these complex skills at their own pace, and to go back and re-watch these skills, to then use each other as resources, to then facilitate and encourage their active independent learning. There would be absolutely no way that I could get my students to go as far as I can get them to go with the conceptual and the skill base with these applications if I didn't present the information in a screencast. It would be not only incredibly difficult, but cumbersome, time-consuming, and boring for the students if I went up to the front of the classroom and I demonstrated each one of these different skills that I wanted them to go through. Instead, they get to watch me go through and model the specific skills that are tied with concepts for each one of these projects. I provide resources, I provide step-to-step information, but these screencasts are really key in enabling the students to be able to be more independent and less tied to me being in front of the class. Here we're going to be looking at a middle school visual arts class where the teacher is using teacher-created material for a skills-based boot camp. So in this middle school video production class, I needed to find a way to get all the students onto at least a basic skill level with using the application iMovie. So what I did was I did a boot camp style first 2 class periods.
The boot camp is for us to learn and improve on our skills on iMovie, and it works by us. For example, we open iMovie, and if we already have skills in iMovie and we know how to put things in, or if we don't, we follow on Ms. G's videos.
Which basically meant that I created a whole entire set of videos that went through every single thing you needed to know in iMovie. I gave the students a set of raw material, and then depending where they were, that's where they started. So if they didn't know anything, they started at the very beginning. If they knew some things, they started in the middle. If they were expert users, they maybe started towards the end. And this way, all students either got a chance to get the basic skills, refresh their skills, or advance their skills. And no student was bored and waiting for other people, helping each other peer-to-peer, and it was a way to have the whole entire class engaged and able to be learning in their own pace, in their own way, in terms of getting them up to date with using this one application. So why use blended learning? Use blended learning as a way to use your virtual classroom to its fullest potential. As a teacher, become more of a curator and do less rote instruction. Spend more time in class working with your students instead of in front of the classroom. Increase your one-on-one interactions with students. Create reusable material that saves time in the future. And build a more student-centered classroom with an emphasis on self-directed and active learning. From the student perspective, the student controls the time, place, path, or pace of their learning. This means that the students can revisit, skip, move on depending on their level, and go further in their learning. This method can also foster peer-to-peer interactions. It utilizes a method of learning that they will need in the future, and it can make skill-based learning more interesting and less tedious for both teacher and student.
The benefits of blended learning in an English classroom particularly is that I can really tailor the class towards my kids' needs. So for example, when I teach vocabulary to my students, obviously some students will know some words and some students will not know some words. And so I'll spend a lot of time on the individual part where they will work on their devices, do a pre-assessment survey, learn the words that they don't know, and then I'll have an opportunity to give full class instruction on the words, the common words that most of the kids do not know. So in that way, I don't waste my time, I don't waste their time. Kids that are quite strong already aren't having to relearn words that they already know, and kids that really need that support can take longer and to learn the words that they don't know at their own pace.
You really get your own pace, you find your pace, it's really comfortable for the student because he can focus on the things he's good at or things he needs help with. And whenever he's not sure, the teacher is still right there, and that really saves a lot of time and effort.
A nice thing to see students who lacked motivation come along and want to work through. Also, I think it was very important for students who are way ahead. They didn't have to sit there and do more problems than necessary. They could work at a fast pace, which they really appreciated. And they could get more into the meaty stuff faster. And it was, again, certain students went online and watched the videos and worked through and were able to get through a majority of the learning records front and back and the next page relatively quickly. And then after they finished the focus questions, they had additional challenge questions that they could work on, which was more engaging for them, as opposed to doing 50 problems that they learned last year or something, dryly, remotely. And then those students who worked ahead became a great resource and were really cared about helping students who didn't understand. And also that students who were struggling, they had a strategy of what to do besides just raise their hand and look at me and say, I don't get it.
Well, I like it because that way we can all improve on what we don't know and learn on the things we don't know. It's not the whole class listening to everything, even when you know it. You can just improve and learn more fast and more easy for yourself.
One of the highlights of utilizing blended learning is it cuts down some work time for you as a teacher. If a student is absent, for example, I don't have to reteach a lesson or assume that the kid will know that lesson because he or she was absent. I can give him or her the actual lesson that he or she can work on his or her own pace. Again, at home, I can use the videos from class, and I can flip the classroom around so they can do the instruction part at home on their own.
So what are some strategies and tips for implementing blended learning? Just as there's no one way to teach a subject, there is no one way to create a blended learning classroom. But I find that having the instructional videos tie the skills with a concept create a more meaningful learning experience. And if you are creating your own screencasts for a project, it is helpful to run through creating the project first before you film the steps for your students. Tips for those creating their own videos and materials. These are some things that I've learned along the way. Preparation is key. Perhaps create a script. Clean up your digital workspace, aka the desktop screen, to limit distractions. Use some sort of microphone, even the microphone from the headphones, such as the Apple earbuds, because audio is important. Audio quality is incredibly important, and poor audio can be distracting. Keep it short and sweet. Video length depends on the subject, but the shorter the better. 5 to 8 minutes is usually the sweet spot. Chunk your content. Chunk the content and even make multiple shorter videos rather than one very long video. Another good tip is to wait 5 seconds before and after you start speaking for editing ease, and also if you want to add transitions. This adds a little bit of wiggle room. Think about how you can have your students hold themselves accountable to their self-directed learning, perhaps by giving them tools to set goals and track their progress. And finally, practice, practice, practice. As with any skill, the more you practice to creating your own materials, the easier it will get. Work on building a workflow that works for your own individual style, and soon it will get easier and easier to prepare materials to create a dynamic, student-centered, engaging, and interactive classroom.
Any questions from your end?